In the heavy, suffocating autumn of 1859, within the secluded hamlet of Morrow Creek, Louisiana, a 7-year-old black child named Samuel Carter became the center of one of the most baffling and terrifying medical enigmas ever recorded in the American South before the Civil War. Dr. Elizabeth Monroe, a rare formally educated physician in a land where medical practice was still ruled by folk healers and midwives, filled 2 leather-bound journals with her observations of a boy whose abilities broke every known law of the natural world. To a casual observer, the boy appeared frail and ordinary, small in stature with dark eyes that rarely seemed to blink and skin the color of rich Mississippi earth. Yet, hidden within that harmless frame lived an intellect that the science of the era simply could not categorize or grasp. During 7 harrowing months, 9 individuals perished under inexplicable circumstances after interacting with Samuel Carter. Every victim was discovered with their eyes wide open, as though they had witnessed something beyond human reality in their final heartbeats. The child claimed he heard voices emanating from the swamp, voices that whispered secrets, exposed hidden truths, and announced the arrival of death. He possessed knowledge that no illiterate child should hold, precise anatomical details of the human frame, awareness of diseases that had not yet shown symptoms, and the intimate dreams that people had never shared with a soul. Before we go further, please remember to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments which city you are listening from. Thank you, and let's move forward. Official records were partially ruined during the Civil War, but the journals of Dr. Monroe survived, tucked away in the attic of her former home for over a century. The revelations within these documents challenge our current understanding of the human mind and raise unsettling questions about the existence of powers that science still fails to explain. This is the account of a black child whose brilliance terrified a white society, whose intelligence threatened the very foundation of a system built on myths of black inferiority, and whose ultimate fate reminds us of the many brilliant minds that were silenced or destroyed because they dared to be exceptional. Before we delve deeper into the story of Samuel Carter and the darkness that descended upon Morrow Creek, if this account is sparking your interest, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the darkest mysteries of American history. Also, please tell us in the comments what state or city you're listening from. We truly love hearing from our community of mystery enthusiasts around the globe. Samuel Carter was born in the spring of 1852 on the Whitmore Plantation, one of the most massive cotton operations in Ascension Parish. His mother, Esther Carter, was a house servant who had successfully learned to read despite the laws forbidding literacy among enslaved people. In stolen moments and whispers, she would trace letters in the dirt behind the kitchen house to teach young Samuel. His father, whose name was never entered into an official record, had been sold away before Samuel reached his 2nd birthday. Esther never spoke of him, though Samuel would occasionally wake in the night to find his mother sitting by the window, tears falling as she stared into the darkness beyond the slave quarters. When Samuel reached 4 years of age, Esther developed a persistent cough that would not subside. Robert Whitmore, the plantation owner, refused to summon a doctor for a slave, demanding she continue her labor despite her failing health. Samuel would sit beside his mother at night, his small hand clutching hers, and he would tell her things that filled her with fear. "Mama," he whispered one night, his voice carrying a gravity no child should hold, "the sickness in your chest is like a flower growing. It has roots that are spreading. The swamp voices tell me it will take you before the cotton blooms again." Esther passed away 3 months later in February 1856, coughing blood into the rags Samuel desperately tried to keep clean. He was only 4 years old, but he did not weep at her funeral. He stood perfectly still and silent as the other enslaved people sang spirituals over her grave in the corner of the plantation where black bodies were laid to rest without markers. When asked why he did not cry, Samuel simply remarked, "She is still here. She talks to me now like the others in the swamp." She says she is finally free. The other enslaved people on the Whitmore plantation began to fear the child. There was something in his gaze, they whispered, something ancient and knowing that shouldn't exist in someone so young. He would stare at people with an intensity that made them restless, as if he could see through their flesh and into their very souls. Old Jeremiah, who had lived on the plantation longer than anyone could recall, warned the others that Samuel had been born with a caul over his face, a sign that he could see into both the world of the living and the world of the dead. "That boy has the sight," Jeremiah cautioned. "He knows things that aren't meant to be known by those still walking this earth." Robert Whitmore also noticed the boy's strangeness, but his concern was of a different nature. The child was too intelligent, too observant, and too articulate for a slave child with no formal education. When Samuel was 5, Whitmore caught him drawing in the dirt, not childish scribbles, but detailed anatomical sketches of the human heart with labels written in careful script. "Where did you learn to write, boy?" Whitmore demanded, his voice sharp with anger and suspicion. Samuel looked up at him with those dark, unblinking eyes and said simply, "The voices teach me. They show me things in my mind that I draw in the dirt. They say the body is just a house, and when the house breaks, the person inside has to leave." This answer terrified Whitmore in a way he could not describe. The idea that a black child, especially one born into bondage, could possess intelligence and knowledge that exceeded his own challenged everything his society taught him about natural order and racial hierarchy. Samuel represented something dangerous, proof that the entire institution of slavery was built on a lie. If a slave child could be this perceptive and extraordinary without any schooling, what did that say about the claims of inferiority used to justify the system? In the summer of 1856, when Samuel was 4.5, Robert Whitmore made a decision that would alter the boy's life forever. He sold Samuel to a slave trader passing through the parish, rid himself of the child who made him uncomfortable simply by existing. Samuel was taken from the only home he had ever known and transported north along the Mississippi River. He was considered too valuable for the brutal labor of the cotton fields, his intelligence was too obvious and his strangeness too marketable. The trader believed he could fetch a premium price for such a unique child, perhaps from a wealthy family looking for a curiosity or a medical institution interested in studying exceptional cases. But Samuel never reached the auction. During a stop in Morrow Creek, the trader, a man named Cyrus Blackwood, suddenly fell ill with violent convulsions. He died within hours, blood pouring from his nose and ears as his body was racked with seizures the local doctor could not explain. Samuel was there when it happened, standing calmly in the corner of the boarding house room, watching with those unblinking eyes as Blackwood thrashed and screamed. When questioned by the authorities, Samuel said only, "He hurt children. The voices told me what he did. They said his time was finished." An investigation into Blackwood's background later revealed a disturbing pattern. Over the previous 5 years, numerous enslaved children in his care had died under suspicious circumstances, disappearances called runaways, or bodies found in rivers marked as drownings. Samuel had somehow known things about Blackwood that no one had been willing to investigate. With no one to claim ownership of Samuel and no legal guardian for a child with no papers, he found himself in an unprecedented situation. He was technically free, though that word meant very little for a black child in 1856 Louisiana. Local authorities considered sending him to orphanages, but those institutions refused to accept him. He was too young to work and too strange to be adopted. It was Dr. Elizabeth Monroe who finally took Samuel into her household. Elizabeth was a rarity in the South, a woman who had studied medicine in Philadelphia and returned to practice despite legal barriers and social stigma. She had inherited property and used her independence to live by her own principles, including a firm opposition to slavery. When she heard of the strange child present at Blackwood's death, her medical curiosity was piqued. When she met Samuel and looked into his eyes, she felt a mixture of fear and fascination, and an overwhelming sense that this child needed protection from a world that would destroy him. "What is your name?" Dr. Monroe asked when the boy was brought to her home. Samuel looked at her with that intense gaze and said, "Samuel Carter. My mama named me Samuel because it means God has heard. She said I was born to hear things others couldn't hear, to know things others didn't know. The voices started talking to me before I could talk back to them." Dr. Monroe was not a superstitious woman, she was trained in the rational methods of scientific medicine. But Samuel challenged her commitment to pure rationalism. The boy spoke with a clarity and vocabulary impossible for his age. He described anatomical structures with the precision of a medical student. When he spoke of the voices, there was no hint of madness, only a calm acceptance of a reality others could not perceive. Dr. Monroe offered him a proposition: he could stay in her home, not as a servant, but as a subject of medical study. She would provide food, shelter, and education in exchange for his help in understanding his abilities. "I want to document what you can do," she explained. "But I will not treat you as a specimen. You will be treated with respect, and you may leave if you wish." Samuel considered her offer with a seriousness far beyond his years. "The voices say you are different," he finally said. "They say you see people as people, not property. I'll stay with you. But you need to know, the people who come near me, the people who mean harm or carry darkness, they don't live very long. I don't kill them, I just know when death is coming, and sometimes the voices make sure it happens faster." This statement should have frightened Dr. Monroe away, but it only deepened her fascination. She had studied cases of exceptional memory and mathematical calculation, but Samuel was different. He seemed to possess knowledge he couldn't have learned and appeared to know specific details about people and events that no observation could reveal. She began her systematic study in August 1856, creating detailed records of their daily interactions. What she discovered both terrified and amazed her. Samuel could describe internal organs with perfect accuracy despite never seeing a medical text. He predicted when people would fall ill weeks before symptoms appeared. He knew the secrets and sins of people he had never met. "How do you know these things?" she asked repeatedly. Samuel's answer was always the same: "The voices tell me. They come from the swamp, from the place where the dead go but don't rest. They are people who died with truths that need to be told. They use me to speak because I was born to hear them. It's a gift and a curse. Dr. Monroe, I know things I don't want to know." The first death after Samuel arrived occurred in September 1856. Marcus Thornton, a wealthy plantation owner, came to Morrow Creek for business and visited Dr. Monroe to consult about stomach pains. Samuel's reaction was immediate and visceral. He backed away from the man, his eyes wide with recognition and horror. "You shouldn't be here," Samuel said, his voice carrying an authority impossible for a child. "The voices are screaming about you. They say you killed 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. They say you buried them where no one would look, in the old cemetery behind your plantation where the slave graves are unmarked." Thornton's face went white, then red with rage. He demanded Dr. Monroe control her property, but there was genuine fear in his eyes. Dr. Monroe defended Samuel, stating he was under her protection and asking Thornton to leave. 3 days later, Thornton was found dead in his carriage from heart failure. However, Dr. Monroe noted disturbing details: his eyes were frozen in terror, and there were marks on his neck like finger impressions. Samuel showed no surprise, explaining the voices said the children he killed were waiting for him on the road. An investigation into Thornton's plantation revealed exactly what Samuel described. Authorities found the remains of 3 children beneath unmarked graves, all showing signs of horrific violence. The enslaved community there, finally able to speak, shared stories of a monster who wore the mask of a gentleman. Samuel had known all of this without ever setting foot on the property. This was not a lucky guess, it was something medical training could not explain. The second death came in October. Reverend Silas Jameson, a pillar of the community who quietly profited from the slave trade, encountered Samuel at the general store. The Reverend cautioned Dr. Monroe about the dangers of educating black people beyond their station. Samuel looked up and told him, "You don't believe in God. The voices say you sold a woman and her baby to different buyers years ago. The woman killed herself and the baby died. You drink to forget, but you never can. Your time is coming soon." The Reverend's facade dropped, revealing something vicious. 2 weeks later, he was found dead in his study from an overdose. Dr. Monroe noted that his eyes held the same look of terror she had seen in Thornton. He had been writing letters of apology to those he had wronged, including the woman Sarah. Samuel told Dr. Monroe that the Reverend could no longer live with what he'd done because the voices followed him everywhere. Dr. Monroe sat down heavily, her rationalism struggling. She warned Samuel that people were noticing the connection between him and these deaths, and that she might not be able to protect him from accusations of witchcraft. Samuel looked at her with profound sadness, saying he had always known he must hide his gift, but sometimes the voices were too loud. The pattern continued. A cruel slave catcher named William Drake died in a violent accident Samuel had predicted. A boarding house owner named Catherine Bellamy, who poisoned people who didn't cooperate, died in her sleep with a frozen scream. Each death was explainable as an accident, but the pattern was unmistakable. Samuel Carter was a conduit for cosmic justice, a vessel for the rage and suffering of his people. Dr. Monroe's journals reveal her growing fear. She conducted tests to see if his knowledge came from heightened observation, but the evidence pointed elsewhere. Samuel knew events he could not have witnessed. In January 1857, she wrote that she was forced to conclude Samuel either had undiscovered sensory perception or was in contact with something beyond the material world. As a physician, she confronted the possibility that human understanding of reality was incomplete. The white community grew hostile, whispering that the boy was cursed, while the enslaved population saw him as an avenging angel or a prophet. Old Jeremiah sought Samuel out in February 1857, finding him by the swamp. He told Samuel that his gift was not a curse, but a part of who they were as a people, a connection to ancient African traditions like the medicine workers who could see sickness. He warned Samuel that white people would eventually come for him because he represented a power they couldn't control. Samuel understood the wisdom, but he knew hiding was no longer possible. The voices were showing him a war that would tear the country apart, rivers of blood, and his own short, bright, and tragic future. The turning point came in March 1857, when Samuel met Benjamin Cole, a slave trader who was dying of cancer. Unlike the others, Cole also had the gift, but he used it to find the vulnerable for profit. He was the dark path Samuel could have taken.